The calendar has turned to the month of August, and y'all know what that means. It's college football season. Yeah, Major League Baseball is still on, but for us who live and die for every Saturday in the fall, we already know what time it is. You didn't know, my name is Michael Fordham. I've been doing some college football content here for a few weeks. We did quarterback tier rankings for all 5 Power 5 conferences. I already did my ACC preview and predictions video where I gave out one conference future as well as 2 season win total bets. Moving on to the Big Ten today, it shouldn't be much of a surprise, but I think this is Ohio State's conference to lose. I think we're going to see some utter cannibalism in the Big Ten West. So I don't have any futures for today. I do have 2 season win total bets that we'll get to in a second. And then I'll also give you my brief thoughts on each team and kind of how I see their season faring. Our timestamps in the description if you want to flip around from team to team. If you're a fan of a particular team and you want to hear my opinion on them, look at the description. I'll have timestamps there for y'all to follow along. Before we get started, first of all, my main platform is on Twitter, so you can follow me there at Fordham Betting. We're deep in the weeds of Major League Baseball right now, but college football is my main sport. Last year in college football, hit at a 55% clip and netted over 27 units, finished the year on an 8-0 run. We had Georgia in the national title game. We had the first half under in that game, had a really good finish to the year. And to be honest with you, I expect even better things this year. Also have tons of sports betting content here throughout the college football season and beyond. So be sure to subscribe here on YouTube. That helps me, that helps the channel, and I would really appreciate that. Also, if you like what you hear today, you have any agreements, disagreements, feel free to like the video as well as comment, whether it's about any of the teams we talk about today or just other general college football thoughts or questions. I want to hear it all below. So please feel free to comment. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. And just before we get started as well, my normal scale during the season is 1, 1.5, and 2 units. So we're going to have plenty of action throughout the season. Trust me. In college football, I tend to be pretty high volume. I'm not trying to spray the board with a ton of preseason bets and tie my money up. With that being said, both these plays are going to be half unit plays. We're going to start with Maryland though. I thought 5.5 was a huge bargain. I mean, I think this is a 7-win team. I'm pretty comfortable saying that. I think their ceiling's probably even higher though. Slowly but surely, Mike Locksley is building a pretty good program up there near our nation's capital. I mean, starting with quarterback, Talia Tagovailoa, obviously he's not his older brother. I think we can all understand that. I've seen a lot of people, dog on him. By my estimation, he had one really poor game last year, and that was against Iowa. Threw 5 interceptions in that game. I mean, that game alone accounted for half of his interception total throughout the year. With that being said, though, 68.5% completion, very efficient through the air, right around 8 yards per attempt. So he's not the best downfield passer, but that's certainly good enough, especially with a really high completion percentage. Did throw for 24 touchdowns, 300 yards a game as well. I don't think that everything's going to fall on him this year. Mike Locksley's actually gotten pretty good output from his running backs. I mean, Maryland had 2 guys last year at or above 5 yards per carry on the ground. So I do think it's a pretty balanced attack. But one thing that I do think, why I said I think this team's ceiling is higher, I do think Tagovailoa is going to have the opportunity to expand his abilities as a downfield passer. Mike Locksley has recruited the wide receiver position extremely well since taking that job. Those guys are starting to develop year after year after year. I think we could see, some of those breakout candidates actually break out this year. I kind of thought they would maybe last year, didn't see it as much. But he's recruited that position very well. They also are very reliable at tight end, returning 4 starters on the offensive line. Now, were they great last year? No. And I think one thing, too, is some of those guys, though they might be returning, they are going to be switching roles. So I understand that. With that being said, I do think this offense already had a floor established last year. I don't see any way they dip down below that. I think with the continued progression of those wide receivers, another year for Tagovailoa in that system, combined with a really underrated run game, this offense is straight up getting overlooked. As far as defensively, I mean, their obvious strength is at corner specifically, but really throughout their whole secondary, their top cover corner is returning. And there's some really good wide receivers in the Big Ten this year. I mean, you got Jaden Reed at Michigan State, obviously the Ohio State guys. But there are some really good top of the line receivers throughout this conference. I actually do think Maryland has what it takes to at least match up well with those guys. I'm not saying they're going to win every matchup, but it's not as if secondary is going to be a liability. I do worry a little bit about the linebacking core and just their ability overall to, there's obviously going to be some potent rushing attacks in the Big Ten this year. I mean, you think about obviously Ohio State with Travion Henderson, and they got some pretty good depth there. But Blake Corum is a breakout candidate. Really all throughout this conference. I'm not exactly, expecting Maryland to step up well against some of these teams. I do think they are dependable on the front four. I do worry a little bit about their depth coming off the edge, but should be serviceable enough up front. Start the year off with Buffalo and then travel to Charlotte. Should be a 2-0 start. I'm not in the business of predicting those huge upsets. I mean, obviously they can happen, but don't see them losing either one of those two games. SMU travels to Maryland week 3. I think SMU is an interesting team. They obviously got a very experienced quarterback with Tanner Mordecai. But at the end of the day, like I said, Maryland does have a good secondary. I don't think SMU will be able to come in there and just throw the ball over the yard in the slightest. And I don't like what SMU has defensively and don't think they match up well with this offense. So I think Maryland wins that game and starts the year 3-0. I'm obviously going to count that Michigan game as a loss. I mean, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world if Maryland and co were able to keep that game close. But especially as you're looking at season win total bets, you're really not trying to, reach too far. You're trying to be reasonable. So obviously going to count that one as a loss. I'm going to say something though. Upcoming, they have Michigan State and Purdue both at home. I think they split that. I think the better matchup for them is actually Purdue. Yes, I know Aiden O'Connell is one of the better quarterbacks returning here in the Big Ten. I actually rated him as my second best quarterback here in the conference. But the issue with Purdue is, I think they're going to be able to throw the ball. They do lose David Bell, so I don't know how much of a frontline guy they have in that room. And also, like I said, Maryland can match up with them somewhat well. And one issue with Purdue, they have a horrible run game. And there's a few teams in this conference like that, as we'll see. I just kind of worry about Purdue overall, that they're kind of a one-trick pony. So I think Maryland is actually in a pretty good spot to win one of these two games. I do think it probably does come against Purdue. I tend to be higher on Michigan State than most. Yeah, they lose Kenneth Walker. Yeah, I'm going to save that actually. I'm going to let y'all wait. We'll get to that in a little bit. Suffice to say, I do think Maryland starts the year 4-2. I mean, barring something unexpected, see no reason why they shouldn't at least win one of those games at Indiana against Northwestern. I mean, they should win both of them. I'm not particularly high on either one of those teams. I guess it's somewhat dependent as to how Maryland's rushing defense is at that point. I think Indiana is going to have to develop something in their run game. And Northwestern has a sneakily good run game as well. I mean, there's a chance right there that we cash this bet through game 8. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong. Things could get shaky at the end of the season. I'm not going to predict that they go into Madison and beat Wisconsin. They're obviously not going to beat Ohio State. It's going to obviously be a precursor to what I have to say about Penn State. I think that's a winnable game for Maryland. Obviously, I'm going to give Penn State the slight edge, being it is in Happy Valley. But I don't think Penn State is a complete team in the slightest. I'm not going to chalk that up as an automatic loss. And then, coming home last week of the season should beat Rutgers. I mean, they thumped them last year. I like what Rutgers has defensively in most areas, but once again, it's just going to come to I just don't think a team like Rutgers can keep up Maryland. I was actually on Maryland. I think they were only 1.5 point favorites to end the year at Rutgers last year. I mean, the game wasn't even close. I pride myself on being like an analytical guy and all that, but sometimes it's as simple as I'm going to take the team that can score pretty efficiently. So I think Maryland wins that game, fairly easily. Suffice to say, I think this is a 7-win team with maybe even higher upside. I originally saw this at 6, actually, at plus money. At FanDuel, they have this at 5.5. Juice to minus 130. But as far as the season win totals, I'm only going to make a bet if it's, over one game out of where I see it. And this was. I think Maryland's a 7-win team, comfortably a 6-win team. So getting it at 5.5, I thought that was a bargain. I tend to be higher on Maryland, just with all those offensive pieces coming back and just another year in that system. I think there's breakout potential there. Yeah, they're not going to match up defensively well with some of these teams, but we're just asking them to make a bowl game. I think that's more than fair. So I did play Maryland over the 5.5 for half a unit. And then like clockwork, I mean, this Iowa team year after year is undervalued. Listen, I'm 22 years old. My whole lifetime, I had the same shtick all throughout. It's going to be boring football, gross quarterback play, gross offense in general. But there's a reason why Kirk Ferentz is the longest tenured head coach in this sport. If you're going to give me 7.5 wins at the plus 110 price, so I'm getting a return by trusting Kirk Ferentz to probably even underachieve his expectations, I'll take that every day. I'm comfortable taking this bet, even knowing that I hate both their quarterback options. I mean, Spencer Petras sucks. Alex Padilla sucks. But the one thing I do expect Iowa to improve in this year is their run game. I mean, I had high expectations last year for Tyler Goodson and just for that Iowa run game in general. And they just weren't able to establish a consistent ground game. I thought they were very mediocre across the board. They do have a few young guns at that position. We saw them in the bowl game against Kentucky. I have high hopes for this unit this year, and obviously it's twofold. I mean, the running game effectiveness doesn't just fall on the running backs. The Iowa offensive line just didn't look good at times in the run block, but I did see progression throughout the year. I think that carries over into this season. Once again, passing attack stinks. I expect it to stink once again, but it's always stunk, and somehow Kirk Ferentz finds ways to win, even despite it. What makes me so comfortable in this bet, though, this has the potential to be another great defense for Iowa. I mean, they're experienced up front. I don't think it's their strength, but certainly should be serviceable enough. This has the chance to be one of the better linebacking cores in college football. I mean, I'm talking about a top 5, top 10 linebacking core. And so this team has the potential to be great against the run. And obviously, like I said, tons of good running backs throughout this conference. I think Iowa's going to match up well with a lot of those teams for that very reason. Obviously can't predict injuries, but I do like the depth at that position as well. It's really one of the more well-rounded units in this conference and maybe even in the country. I think this Iowa linebacking core is going to make a huge difference in the run game this year. Secondary was great last year. I mean, like I said, they picked off Taulia Tagovailoa 5 times in that game earlier in the year. I mean, true ball hawks in that secondary. I'm not expecting that. I mean, they obviously lost some from last year's team, but I do expect it to be a very good unit once again. And at the very least, like above average, reliable. But probably going to be even better than that. I mean, it's going to be hard to top what they did last season, but it's obviously a well-coached team. Do think some of those new pieces fit in well in this defense. 2 non-conference games here that you can pretty clearly check out to a win in my mind. Both in South Dakota State and Nevada. As far as the Iowa State game, obviously Kirk Ferentz has really dominated that series. I mean, I feel like that's Matt Campbell's kryptonite at Iowa State to this point, is that he just cannot beat Iowa. I don't think it's going to start this year. We'll talk about Iowa State in that Big 12 video, which should be out this weekend. They're working in a lot of new pieces. I mean, they obviously lose a 4-year starter in Brock Purdy. They lose one of the best, if not the best, running backs in college football in Breece Hall. They lose a ton up front defensively. I think that's a tough task for that young team early in the season. I think Iowa State's an interesting team throughout the year. I'm not going to expect them to go into Iowa City and beat a team that much better teams before them weren't able to do either. So I'm not calling that a surefire win by any means for Iowa, but I do think they win that game. Should go on the road and beat Rutgers. I mean, how is Rutgers going to move the ball against Iowa? I don't get it. Whether it's Noah Vedral or Gavin Wismat, neither one of those guys is going to be that effective of a passer, especially early on. I mean, if it is Wismat, he's still a young quarterback. And this is a brutal matchup early in the season. Then Rutgers had running struggles all year. So, I mean, they might run for like 37 yards in that game. So, don't think Iowa has much trouble there. I mean, pretty conceivably, we're going to get a 4-0 start from the Hawkeyes. I really think that Michigan game at home is going to be a toss-up game. I mean, I can already see all the hype being generated around that game. Hopefully, it's on Saturday Night Football on ABC. We get Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. Like I said, with this defense, yeah, Blake Corum has breakout potential to be one of the best running backs in the country this year for Michigan. But, I mean, this is one of, if not the toughest matchups Blake Corum will have all year. I don't know how game-changing that Michigan passing game is going to be. I could see them struggling to move the ball in that one. And I have questions about Michigan's defense. Now, obviously, we're going to get to that in a second. I'll try to keep it brief. But that being said, I think this is a toss-up game either way. Do you think Illinois could be sneaky this year? I lean towards playing their win total over 4.5. With that being said, I'm not in the business of predicting huge upsets. I think you have to account for them. But this specifically, I mean, I'm obviously going to lean pretty heavily towards an Iowa win here. We're not going to go on the road and beat Ohio State. I think we can all understand that. I mean, coming back home and playing Northwestern the next week shouldn't be much trouble there. Yeah, Northwestern can run the football, but just not a complete team overall. Mind these next 2 games right here at Purdue and then against Wisconsin. I'm going to expect them to go 1-1 in these games. And granted, we have something built up. I mean, Iowa has a pretty favorable start to the season. So, I mean, say they were to drop both those games, we would still be well in this bet. I do think they split those. Like I said, I mean, I know Purdue beat Iowa last year pretty badly, but typically, obviously Purdue is going to be a flashy team with a good passing game, but that doesn't mean they're the more complete team. Like I said earlier, Purdue can't run the football, and I just worry about that up front, matching up with a team like Iowa, I'd actually probably lean towards a loss when Iowa, comes back home and plays Wisconsin that next week. We haven't seen much from Graham Mertz up to this point, but I do think Wisconsin up front on both sides of the ball is going to give them a chance to win basically every game they play this year. At Minnesota, I think Minnesota is another interesting team. As you can see, I mean, pretty good chance that we're going to have cannibalism here in the Big Ten West this year. I actually slightly lean towards a win for Iowa in this game. And I'll tell you why. I mean, I do expect Minnesota's passing game to improve this year. And yes, they have a good running game. But by this point in the year, I think Iowa's running game will be in a much better state than it was last year. I think Iowa can actually somewhat move the ball on Minnesota. I worry about Minnesota somewhat at all three levels defensively. And then to close out the season, we'll see where Nebraska is at that point. I'm going to touch on all these teams, like I said. I really think Iowa does win that game at home. I think Nebraska's offense will look good at times, but at the end of the day, they can't run the football against, pretty good teams. So I'm not going to expect them to run the ball against a really good linebacking core. I don't think Casey Thompson. I think Casey Thompson's a guy that can operate with a lot of talent around him. I just don't know if that's what he has this year. And I know Nebraska has a great linebacking core too, but I do worry about some of their other areas, both in the secondary and then as well up front. So I do think Iowa wins that game. Suffice to say, I think we got an 8-4 team in Iowa, potentially even 9-3. Like I said, I typically don't play these unless I see like a 1-win difference from what I see to what the number is posted. But like I said, we're getting a return on 7.5 with one of the most consistent teams in college football that could very well start the season 6-0. I mean, I want to take my chances with Iowa here. Like I said, just a half unit play, but getting that plus 110 return on a pretty low number to begin with, I did see some value in that, so I played it. All right, guys, before I get to the rest of the video and give you my thoughts on the rest of these teams, you might notice that I got the Flamingo shirt on here. There we go. I got the Flamingo shirt on here. You might be wondering, how do I look as cool and sexy as you? Well, I'll tell you. Proud 90 Golf. Unique polos, but very comfortable as well. They have more traditional styles. If something like this doesn't float your boat, it's extremely comfortable. I wore this to the course. I wore it throughout the house, wore it to the range. I wear a Proud 90 everywhere, and so can you. I mean, they got a great selection of polos as well as T-shirts. I know you guys out there in Big Ten country, you got some cold weather to deal with. Well, they got a great selection of hoodies and quarter zips as well. Not to mention, they recently added a women's line. So if you are a lady or if you want to just treat that special someone, Proud 90 has got all your golf apparel needs. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to proud90.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you can just click the link in the description as well. Browse their selection. If you see anything you like at checkout, it's going to be right as you enter your payment information. It'll say discount code. Enter the code Fordham and get you 15% off your order. That's code Fordham at checkout. Gets you 15% off your order. Support me. Support Proud 90. Proud90.com. Code Fordham at checkout gets you 15% off. Let's get right back into the video. Now that we got those two plays out of the way, just going to go down the rest of the list and break down some of these other teams in the Big Ten this year, give you my thoughts and kind of give you my feel/lean as to how I see these teams faring this year. Obviously with Ohio State, I mean, if you see a team at minus 250 to win the conference, probably tells you a pretty good story. I said this in my quarterback tier ranking video. I think CJ Stroud's the best quarterback in the country. I mean, he was absolutely amazing last year. To be over 70% and then right around 10 yards per attempt, that's elite quarterback play. He also takes care of the football. So I personally love Stroud. I think he'll be the first overall pick next year in the NFL draft, or at least the first quarterback taken off the board. But, this is a complete offense. I mean, Travion Henderson gives Ohio State elite running back play and an elite running back option. Obviously, you have to account for injuries and those sorts of things. I think there's a ton of quality depth behind him as well. I mean, guys who have gotten their feet wet in big games. So it's not going to all necessarily fall on Henderson. Obviously, him being healthy means that group just gets elevated that much more because, he is an elite talent. Obviously, that they lose Chris Olave. They lose Garrett Wilson. But, I mean, get Jackson Smith and Jigba back. I mean, should win the Biletnikoff this year with Stroud throwing to him. They obviously got to replace two of those three guys. But they've got guys waiting in the wings. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. for sure is a guy that's caught my eye. They got Fleming. They got tons of other guys waiting in the wings. If you're an Ohio State fan, let me know some of the breakout potential candidates at the wide receiver position. I mean, I know they've recruited that position so well, and really since Urban Meyer, it's just been year after year, generation or class after class that's really just kind of fed off each other. So should be a very good unit once again. Were the offensive linemen, a tad inconsistent last year? Yes, we saw that some. In the Michigan game. But with that being said, certainly going to be good enough to match up with a lot of the teams in the Big Ten West. and definitely shouldn't be a liability. And with everything they have going for them, could very easily be the best offense entering the season. Now, obviously, in both of Ohio State's losses last year to Oregon and Michigan, it wasn't, did the offense play perfect? No, but they were quite leaky defensively in both those games, somewhat for different reasons. But, the common theme was just, especially in that Oregon game, I mean, too many just breakaway runs where it's almost, guys just aren't being put in the right position. And they just kind of got beat against Michigan, just kind of got punched in the mouth, to be honest with you. Obviously, though, things are changing. They brought in Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State had one of the best defenses in the country last year. So I thought that was a really good addition. I do have question marks about this unit. I think they're solid in their interior defensive line, but I don't know how much upside there is there. That's not the most important thing defensively. As long as you got solid gap fillers, should be more than enough, especially with how many points Ohio State's going to score. I think there's potential off the edge, but we just haven't seen it consistently enough. Depth at linebacker is one question I have too. Obviously, it's a very physical position. Being in the Big Ten, you're going to play a lot of hard-nosed games. Especially in this conference, you have to have quality depth, especially at a physical position like that. So I do worry about that a little bit. And then just overall, from their corners, need to see a little bit more consistency. Jim Knowles was brought in to fix these issues. Time will tell if he does. I will say, best thing a new defensive coordinator can have is an elite offense, and Jim Knowles certainly has that. I think Ohio State should win every game they play. With the season win total being at 11, I think you do have to account for one slip up. Maybe it's at Michigan State. Maybe it's at Penn State, Wisconsin, one of those. I personally, I don't see it. I think this team will be in the playoff this year. I just see way too much talent offensively, and I do think Jim Knowles shores some of those things up defensively as well. I just can't play it at 11 though, just kind of out of principle. With that being said, Ohio State fans, I'm very high on the Buckeyes this year. All right, moving on to Michigan. Obviously, I kind of hinted at it. I mean, I don't really see this team being back in the playoffs this year. Don't see them as much of a threat to Ohio State personally. One thing I do want to talk about, though, and obviously we'll get into the makeup of their team and how I see their season going. But as far as this quarterback battle, I'm sorry. I think it's ridiculous that this is even a question. Call me crazy. Cade McNamara, led him to a playoff last year. For his job to even be in question, in my mind, it's just ridiculous. It's not all about arm strength and just, what could happen with the backup. It's about the actual consistency. And especially in this conference, like this conference for sure, turnovers are going to be a killer. For a guy like McNamara, who is, proven to be poised. I mean, just 4 interceptions last year. Yeah, he's not going to light the world through the air. I get that. But especially within this offensive system, it's not really predicated on chucking the ball around. I think it's ridiculous. Cade McNamara should absolutely start the season as quarterback. Obviously, though, do view this as a run-first team. We saw it last year. Hassan Haskins was really their main guy. But, man, what we saw from Blake Corum as a true freshman, I think he was just 17 years old, too, so a very young true freshman. I mean, he absolutely lit the world on fire. Over 6.5 yards per carry, nearly 1,000 yards on the ground as a freshman. Pretty small sample size, too. I mean, very impressive from him. And they have good supplemental options as well. I mean, Donovan Edwards could be a starting running back in most places as well. So regardless who the starter is, this is going to be a team predicated on running the football. It's actually kind of why I lean more towards McNamara. They get Ronnie Bell back at wide receiver. I just don't see this being a potent passing attack, and that's okay. I don't think they need to be. They didn't need to be last year. With some of these defensive issues, they might need to be this year. One thing going for them, though, they will be really good up front once again, offensively on the offensive line. I mean, can't expect them to be as elite as they were last year, but still, I mean, this offensive line core should be a major strength for Jim Harbaugh and company. I mentioned it. I do have concerns about this defense, though. Obviously, you lose 2, key edge pieces. Well, not just key. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson was in the Heisman Trophy running. So obviously a lot to replace there. I mean, like any other major program, yeah, you have talent waiting in the wings, but it's just about how that talent is able to integrate themselves into actually being, called upon in key situations. So they're very young off the edge. I think that's a major unknown for this team. Jim Harbaugh has high expectations for this linebacking core. And, I don't blame him. But with that being said, I still need to see more from that unit. As far as interior defensive line, I think their frontline guys are solid. Depth could be an issue. Once again, this is a conference where I think depth is a major factor. So something to watch out for there. But I think most importantly, in their secondary, going to be very young. I think to pair really, young unknowns at the edge position compared with the guys in the secondary, I mean, this is a team that could be vulnerable to getting thrown all over. I mean, let's just be honest. I'm not saying it will happen, but also new defensive coordinator. There's a lot of moving parts here. I think there's some variance with how Michigan, shakes out defensively. Michigan's season win total is obviously at 9.5. One clear loss in my mind with Ohio State. I actually lean towards, I'm going to count it as a toss-up game, but I do lean towards Michigan losing on the road in Iowa City as well. From there, there's just not that much leeway. I could easily see Michigan State beating Michigan. Penn State could be a tough out with a very experienced quarterback, though I'm not that high on them. That's one thing they do have working in their favor. Maybe Nebraska, maybe Maryland. We'll see. And like I said, you still have to account for one of those bottom barrel teams, not having a bottom barrel year. Let's not forget, Michigan State did not have high expectations last year, and we saw what happened. I think you have to account for something like that as well. I'm really interested to see how this quarterback battle shakes out. It would be, a bad move, in my opinion, to not stick with Cade McNamara. All right, I already kind of alluded to it. I tend to actually be kind of low on Penn State, not only this year, but overall as a program. I worry about just their quarterback development, first of all. I mean, we saw them just have no quarterback depth last year whatsoever. So maybe it's more just macro level. I do think Sean Clifford, I think I rated him average in that quarterback tier ranking. I really wanted to play this season win total under. It's at 8.5. At the end of the day, though, I end up laying off. I think this is probably an 8-4 team in my mind. So just not enough value, especially to lay, minus 135. As I said, I'm not trying to spray the board with these season win total bets. I'm going to address one thing, though, because somebody's commented on that Big Ten tier list video. I appreciate you commenting, by the way. I'm not calling you out, but I want to respond to that, pointing out the fact that, James Franklin just got a contract extension. He's there forever. Well, Tom Herman got a contract extension too with Texas. Which I saw. Jeremy Pruitt got a contract extension the year before he got fired. I wouldn't really say that means all that much. So I just wanted to say that, where my concerns lie with this team is really just being a balanced offensive attack. They got to make up for the loss of Jahan Dotson. Probably not going to do that, but still should have plenty of options around Sean Clifford. It really just comes down to being able to run the football. I mean, that was a major liability for this team last year. I think you put some of it on the running backs, but I think you got to put most of it on the offensive line. This is not a conference where you can afford to have a weak offensive line and expect to win, as they found out last season. There's always room for improvement, but we'll see if that happens. I kind of have my doubts. As far as defensively, solid on the interior defensive line, but from what I've heard, I'm not really high on them, as far as being able to get after the passer. They do have a really good secondary, and so maybe they don't get torched, going up against some of the better passing attacks in this conference, which they will week 1 against Purdue. Or a little bit about linebacker depth and just need to see that group take a step. I do think there's some variance with this team. Like I said, I think they're probably an 8-4 team. Saw a little bit of value in the season win total under. Penn State fans, regarding some of my questions as it pertains to some of those position groups, feel free to let me know. I'm obviously a sports bettor, and so I want all the information I can get. That's just kind of how I see Penn State going into this year. I tend to be a little bit lower on them than probably most other people. On to Wisconsin. Obviously, the issue with Wisconsin for a while now, or really since Graham Mertz took over, very inconsistent passing game. I mean, Mertz was poor last year. Let's just call a spade a spade. Thankfully for him, he's got a potentially elite running back in Braylon Allen, nearly 1,300 yards and almost 7 yards per carry last year as a freshman. So Paul Chryst has said, and I think all teams say, we want to create more chunk plays this year, but I'm sure they said that prior to last year too. And I'm gonna have to see it from Graham Mertz before I believe it. But that being said, though, I alluded to this earlier. Wisconsin's going to be so good up front on both sides of the ball. I mean, they have a certain standard. I feel like it's just who Wisconsin is. They're going to have a really good offensive line, and they're going to be physical up front defensively as well. They do have experience in their secondary, but I think they're certainly beatable against those higher-end passing offenses, which is why I really just don't give them much of a chance to beat Ohio State. I also worry a little bit about their linebacking core. Lost a really talented duo at that position last year. Losing a duo like that usually doesn't go unnoticed. Suffice to say, I mean, Wisconsin's typically not a team I'm that high on, but I actually kind of lean towards their win total over this year at 9. If Graham Mertz is able to elevate and just be a slightly above average quarterback, think this season win total over will cash, because I think they got enough around, got a potentially elite running game. And then you're just so physical up front that, should be able to beat a lot of teams by that alone. So I actually am higher on Wisconsin than I might have thought, earlier this offseason. As far as Nebraska, yeah, the thing is a team with just a ton of variance entering this season. Obviously, the administration actually supported Scott Frost. I got to go 3-9 and get that much public support in year 4 was quite interesting. Obviously, that 3-9 has, somewhat of a caveat because they played a lot of close games, but there is a skill that's called winning games in the fourth quarter, and he hasn't had it up to this point at Nebraska. We'll see if things turn around this year. I didn't mind the Casey Thompson addition. Saw him have really good flashes last year at Texas. I can tell you as a Texas fan that was way too inconsistent for my liking. Just go watch how he played against TCU, against Iowa State, against West Virginia. Common theme. All those games were on the road. I don't really think that you can call him an upgrade from Adrian Martinez. I do think Martinez actually showed strides as a passer last year. With this Nebraska offense, their best running back just averaged under 4.5 yards per carry last year. And, I do have my worries about this offensive line. They lost their anchor and leader at center, and they were just, too hit or miss last year for my liking. It's going to be an offense that relies heavily on the tight end. So I do worry a little bit just about creating explosive plays as well. Defensively, the one thing they got working for them is their linebackers. Garrett Nelson is one of the better players in the country. And overall, this is a team that should be very good against the run. They also added Ochuan Mathis out of the transfer portal, former all Big 12 edge guy from TCU. So that'll certainly help out. I don't think overall interior defensive line is going to be a strength. I feel as long as they're going to be serviceable, should be good enough. Secondary, in my opinion, though, is nothing slightly above average. I think in some of their tougher passing matchups, I'm probably not going to give them the edge in there. Their season win total is obviously at 7.5. I'm kind of in wait and see mode with Nebraska. We'll see how things work out for Scott Frost. Definitely a unique approach, especially this day and age, by the Nebraska administration. Minnesota is a team that, listen, they went 9-4 last year. And if you listen to PJ Fleck throughout the offseason, he was not satisfied with that whatsoever. And they had quite a bit go against them last year. Game 1 against Ohio State, Muhammad Ibrahim goes down with that Achilles tear. They had tons of running back depth that really stepped in and kind of filled that void for them. I think that's a big loss to take early in the season. I was actually impressed that Minnesota was able to go 9-4 last year despite that adversity. And one thing I think is going to change for this offense this year is I think Tanner Morgan in his senior year is going to go out with a bang. I really do. This is a guy in 2019, 66% completion, over 10 yards per attempt, which is an elite mark. He's obviously regressed each of the past 2 seasons, but now he gets reunited with Kirk Siriaroka, who was his offensive coordinator back in 2019, was gone the last 2 years, and now he's back. So I think that marriage has proven to work in the past, and I think it will work this year. They don't have a lot of quality depth, established depth, I should say, at this point at wide receiver. So I do worry maybe a little bit about that. And they also lost a lot on the offensive line as well. Do bring back their anchor at center, which will help. All Big Ten caliber player, but still probably not going to be a shoo-in to be able to replace that sort of production. This is a top 10 defense a year ago, but once again, they lost so much on the defensive line. So the main reason I didn't play Minnesota's season win total over at the 7.5, because in theory, I would really like that. But losing as much as they did on both the offensive and defensive line, it's something that I just don't like about the makeup of this team. I'm also not expecting their linebackers to be able to step up against some of those tougher running back matchups. And they also lost their number 1 corner from last year. Both along the D line and in their secondary. They added guys out of the portal, but those guys aren't always sure things, as we should know by now. I would lean towards the over 7.5 wins, but don't think that's a sure thing by any means. As far as Purdue, I rated Aiden O'Connell as the second best quarterback in this conference entering the season. I don't really know how you couldn't. 73.5% completion last year, 8.1 yards per attempt, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Those are brilliant numbers. I don't care what system you're playing in. If you're, 73.5% is 73.5%. That's amazing. Purdue has no balance offensively. They didn't have a single running back last year that averaged over 4 yards per carry. And, it's a reason why Jeff Brom has not really been a championship level coach. It's hard to win championships with no balance offensively. They have to replace David Bell, but still should have plenty of receiver options as well as tight end options that should be able to supplement that loss. They also returned 3 starters on the offensive line. There's not really one, level defensively that, I worry about more than the other. I guess maybe edge play is something that concerns me slightly. I don't know how talented this defense really is in some of their tougher matchups. They do have a lot of experience in the secondary, which should help. But that being said, I mean, they're still probably not going to step up well against some of these elite wide receiving cores that they might have to face. Way too many toss-up games for me to have a great feel on the season win total, so I'll pass. It's going to be interesting, though, because at the very least, Purdue should be a very fun team to watch. All right, I basically already went over Michigan State. I'll kind of briefly go over it again. Peyton Thorne is a guy that did show promise last year in his first year as the starter. I guess 61% is a little bit low, but 8.5 yards per attempt. I mean, he's going to have Jaden Reed once again on the outside, who, in my opinion, is one of the best receivers in college football. I think he's got good enough options around him as well. No, Mel Tucker's not going to be able to supplement the loss of a guy like Kenneth Walker III. It's just not going to happen. But I do like each of the transfers he brought in. Jarek Broussard from Colorado. I mean, this is a guy back in 2020 was the Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year. So can't underlook that pickup. Then also getting Berger from Wisconsin. Throughout his career, 5.1 yards per carry, and just kind of got passed up by some of their other options. One thing I also like about this Michigan State team, starting experience across the board on their offensive line. So do like that. Horrible passing defense last year. So until I see a significant improvement from that unit, then I'm probably not going to have high hopes overall for their defense, because I do think teams will be able to pick on them for that. Mel Tucker does have high expectations for his linebackers, but I feel like every coach has high expectations. I got to see it on the field first. I think Michigan State, a lot of people think they're a one-hit wonder. I'm not saying they'll have as good of a year as they did last year. In fact, I know they won't, but I still think there's a team that, could make some noise in some of these games that you might not expect them to. All right, and one of the bigger surprises last year, I mean, listen, I think most sports bettors kind of realized that Indiana was overvalued going into last year, but I mean, I don't think anybody expected a 2-10 year from Tom Allen and co. Tom Allen brought in Connor Bazelak to add some stability to the quarterback room. 66% in the SEC is somewhat impressive, but just 7 yards per attempt and 23-17 touchdown to interception ratio. Don't love that. If you're an Indiana fan, let me know below about your running back room. I mean, it's a super young group, but did bring in some 2 Power 5 transfers that could be able to carry the load. The issue is the offensive line was just so bad in run block last year that it's just hard for me to predict much at this point. We'll see. And then, as I mentioned, don't love the weapons on the outside for Bazelak. Front seven in my mind for Indiana on defensively, total question mark. I will say there's not a lot of continuity within that unit. Their obvious strength is going to be their 2 corners and just probably their secondary as a whole. But I mean, to have your front seven as a total question mark entering a Big Ten season, that's the wrong unit to be having questions about. It's hard for me to really have a great feel for Indiana, given that their front seven is a total question mark in my mind. Super young players. I mean, obviously a team that went 2-10 last year. I don't know why I'd give them the benefit of the doubt. Tough team to read on, to be honest with you, entering this season. Just really weird, because Tom Allen was a guy that, America just kind of fell in love with because of he played Ohio State close. Is that why? But he went 2-10 last year, so he's not getting the benefit of the doubt from me. I actually think Illinois is a team that could surprise people this year. 5-7 last year in year 1 under Bret Beilema. Considering the program he inherited, I wouldn't call that a bad year by any means. Call me crazy. I think Tommy DeVito is a quarterback upgrade for Bret Bielema. Brandon Peters just didn't work out last year, and then Artur Sitkowski might be the worst quarterback ever. So I do think Tommy DeVito is an upgrade. He hasn't played much the last 2 years, but did have pretty good numbers overall for Syracuse in 2019. And I think he's just the type of pro-style quarterback that is going to work in the system. This is obviously going to be a run-first team, though. I mean, Chase Brown, 1,000-yard rusher from a year ago, nearly 6 yards per carry. And they have depth at that position. So I think they're going to pound the ground game. They still got Isaiah Williams, who's a huge X factor for them. Luke Ford, their tight end, could be set for a big year. And should be good up front once again. This is actually a top 30 scoring defense in the country last year. Probably not going to be game-changing in their front 4, but should be able to stop the run once again. Really good linebacking core. I think they're solid in the secondary, but do think certainly that is a beatable unit for them. It's still early in the Bret Bielema era, and I think a lot of that's predicated on them improving their passing game, which is certainly not a lock. Suffice to say, I think Illinois is somewhat of an undervalued team going into this year. Rutgers in year 3 under Greg Schiano. I mean, I know the expectations are high. I do have quite a few question marks about this team, though. A, who's going to be the quarterback? Because if it's Noah Vedral, I mean, this team is just limiting itself. If it were me, I'd roll with Gavin Wismat. He was the much more, former 4-star recruit that does seem to be the favorite at this point. But I mean, all the running backs last year were below 4 yards a carry, so didn't really establish much of a run game. Wismat might have some good wide receiver options to work with. I just think the one thing with Greg Schiano is even in year 3, especially in relative to who he's playing in the Big Ten, I do think this offensive line still has some jumps to make as far as that goes. So I think that's my main worry is really quarterback and offensive line. Well, and just running game, like I said. They do have some strengths defensively, though. I think front four is a strength. They were really good getting after the passer a year ago. I think that's a group that still has potential, especially against some of these weaker O-lines. I think their secondary is good too, and they're very experienced, which is obviously a plus. One thing though is I do think teams will be able to run on Rutgers. Don't like this linebacking unit. Think it could be a major weakness on this team, both an inexperienced and thin unit. So I don't really expect much from them there. We're just gonna have to wait and see with Rutgers. All right, guys, to cap it off, we got Northwestern. Really kind of a head-scratching 2021 season. They obviously made the Big Ten title game back in 2020, and then proceeded to go 3-9 last year. It really all starts with quarterback play. I mean, Peyton Ramsey gave them a certain floor at quarterback back in 2020 that they just didn't have last year. That's kind of my issue with them once again. I mean, Ryan Helinski sucks. He sucks. 57% completion, under 6 yards per attempt. He's not a good quarterback. So it's going to have to be Brendan Sullivan or Carl Richardson, both who are just huge unknowns. They can run the football, which I do like. Both main running backs over a year ago were over 5 yards per carry. As you might expect with a Pat Fitzgerald-led team, they are experienced and good up front on the offensive line. But I think that passing game it's just a major unknown. It's not a bad defense by any means. Think they're serviceable in the secondary. I do worry a little bit about linebacker depth. They have one good option there, but I don't really know what else is behind that. They're okay up front, but they got gashed against the run last year. Did have some guys in the portal, but can't always count on that as your main source of talent until they get quarterback figured out. It's just hard for me to expect much from this Northwestern squad. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I appreciate all you watching, getting this far. Obviously didn't have any futures for the Big Ten. It's Ohio State's conference to lose, and I think Big Ten West could be cannibalism this year, like I said. So didn't have anything there, but we did have 2 season win totals. I'll go ahead and go over those one more time. Maryland over the 5.5 wins, and then Iowa over the 7.5 wins. I like both of those for half a unit. Big 12 will be next. We'll have the Big 12 video out hopefully this weekend. College football is so close. I know we can all smell it. We got fall camp starting up. It's definitely an exciting time to be a college football fan. So I appreciate all y'all watching. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps my growth and what I'm trying to build here. So I'd appreciate that. Be sure to like the video, and you can follow me on Twitter at Fordham Betting as well. Appreciate all y'all watching. Yeah, I'll see y'all here in a few days.